Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen. It's an enormous pleasure to host you once again in the Founders Hall and to act as chair for the final keynote of this year's EURAM conference. For those that I haven't bumped into yet, which I sort of slightly can't believe there are still any of those yet at the conference, but my name's Steve Brammer. I'm Dean of the School of Management here at the University of Bath, as well as co-chair of EURAM24. This afternoon's panel welcomes four extremely esteemed and influential leaders in the field of management to reflect on the future of management research. And I'm grateful to each of you for sharing your time. What I'll do first is I'll briefly introduce the fabulous panelists one by one. In the green corner, Peter McKiernan. Peter is a professor at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow and Dean of the EURAM College of Fellows. Peter joined Strathclyde as Professor of Management in Strategy and Organisation in 2011. Before Strathclyde, Peter's held professorial positions at Warwick, St Andrews and Murdoch University in Australia. Peter has served those institutions in a whole range of roles, including as Dean, Head of School, Head of Group, and Chair of Department. Peter's main research focus lies with how organisations learn about how their future might unfold and how they might prepare their current strategies to cope with those futures. Peter holds 7 fellowships from academic and commercial bodies and has been president of both BAM and EURAM, and served 2 periods of Dean of the College of Fellows at BAM, and in 2021 was elected the inaugural Dean of the Fellows College of EURAM, a position he continues to hold. In 2012, he won the Seaman Institutional Champion of the Year, and in 2016, BAM honoured him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and in 2022, he was honoured with the highest award from BAM, the Cooper Medal for Outstanding Contribution and Leadership. So that's the wonderful Peter McKiernan. Katy, I might introduce you next. Katy, in the far corner, is Professor of Markets, Marketing and Management at Lancaster University and President of the British Academy of Management. Katy Mason's research expertise lies in the making and shaping of moral markets. Making moral markets is a particular form of open and collaborative innovation that aims to co-design markets for the good of people and the planet, infrastructuring an everyone economy that reuses materials in ways that best protect our planetary boundaries. Studying the management practice that mobilise and collective coordinated actions that constitute moral markets, Katy's worked with organisations such as Rolls-Royce, Microsoft, Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst, the Cabinet Office, the Yorkshire County Council, and on and on and on. Katy is currently President of the British Academy of Management. She's a Fellow of the British Academy of Management, as well as the Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, and the Cabinet Office Policy Fellow and Chartered Companion of the Chartered Management Institute. Her work has been published in all the best places, and I'm sure she might reflect on that at greater length as part of our conversation. Nearest me, Professor Andrew Crane. I'm always glad to introduce a home team member. Andrew is a professor here in the School of Management and Director for the Centre of Business Organisations and Society. He's a wonderful colleague and for the last 25 years has been examining the changing roles and responsibilities of the corporation in the context of the global economy. Andy's research specialises in issues of corporate social responsibility and business ethics with a particular focus on modern slavery, the political role of business, cross-sector partnerships and CSR communication. Andrew's published over 100 publications and is one of the most highly cited researchers in responsible business. Beyond his academic roles, Andrew is a member of the Modern Slavery Engagement Forum at the Home Office for the UK Government, a founding member of the Data Strategy Board for TISC Report, and since 2017 he's served as part of the Development Committee of the Slavery and Trafficking Risk Template, a free open source industry standard template for companies managing their supply chain risks. Last and absolutely not least, in the brown corner, Alessandro Zattoni is Professor of Corporate Strategy and Corporate Governance at Luis University and President currently of EURAM. Alessandro has been involved in various roles in universities and business schools. He's been head of department of the Department of Business and Management at Luis. He's been Associate Dean for Executive Education and Lifelong Learning and a member of the steering committee of Luis Business School. Before joining Luis, he's held faculty positions at Bocconi in Milan and Parthenope University of Naples. Alessandro's major research interests lie in corporate governance with a focus on boards of directors, governance codes, and sustainability. He's published more than 150 works, including books, book chapters, journal articles, and teaching cases. Alessandro is a fellow of the European Academy of Management and also currently president of EURAM. Alessandro has served as co-chair of the Corporate Governance Track, the national representative for Italy, and a member of the Scientific Council of EURAM. He's also former president of the International Corporate Governance Society, and he continues to serve as a board member. So please join me in welcoming an incredibly experienced and august panel. So just to share the plan transparently, I'll begin in a minute and give colleagues an opportunity to share some broad opening reflections on the question of the future of management research by asking a broad opening question. I'll then ask some more specific questions, offering opportunities for colleagues to contribute and chip in, and then we'll open it up to the floor for Q&A. As for all panels, I will look sternly in the general direction of the audience and say, please be brief and direct with your questions, no monologues, otherwise I'll be jumping into the crowd and preventing that. Okay, so let's begin if we could please. So colleagues, what do you see as the main challenges and opportunities that you'd like to see the future of management research address? Perhaps I'll start with you, Katy.
I guess what is on my mind, and we've done quite a bit of work at the British Academy of Management on this, is the greening economy. So we're really interested in sustainable futures. We are in the age of the Anthropocene, and this means that we need to radically rethink every element of our lives. And in my research group, market studies group, so we are interdisciplinary scholars from sociology, anthropology, marketing, geography, so quite a range of fields. We're really concerned with, if you like, the socio-technical and political work that needs to be done to restructure our societies. And we are not society and markets, we are a marketized society. So it seems that markets are a really important part of what happens there. So I think paying attention to agendas around degrowth and helping us collectively reimagine a completely different sort of economy is going to be really important. Thinking about greening transitions around energy and everything that involves is going to be really important. And thinking about the moralities in markets. So our values, as opposed to just economic value, but social value, that's going to be really important for what we are prepared to pay for and what we are prepared to go without consuming and what we are prepared to do to make sure resources are repaired or recycled or reused, creating new circularities in the economy. And I think those sorts of topics, they're wicked problems, so they're going to demand us to be a different type of researcher in future. And I think the importance of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research is going to be really important. And I think those are each very different modes of researching. So for example, multidisciplinary research means that we're working alongside people looking at the same complex problem but from other disciplines, but we're still thinking about it from our own frame and working in that way. And I think many business and management scholars are well set up to do that sort of work. Interdisciplinary research requires not just an investment of expertise in your own discipline, but also expertise speaking to other disciplines so you can hear well and work well with others and collectively produce knowledge between the two of you. And then transdisciplinary research takes on external partners, so private businesses, public sector organisations, NGOs, and it integrates them into the framing of the research problem as well. So I think those types of agendas with those types of approaches to research are going to be fundamental to what we do.
Fabulous, thank you. Alessandro, I might invite you to go next. Each of you need to pull your microphone a little closer.
Yep, thank you.
Fabulous.
There are several topics, but I like to pick up one. And the one that I want to pick up is something that I'm becoming more and more concerned about our work as a scholar, and it's about what should we do in terms of research. So what is a good scholar from research standard? And I think if we take this question, at least for me, it's quite clear what is a good scholar. Is a scholar that, with his work, has an impact on society and an academy. So he's trying to change the world, to discover with passion, with genuine interest, something new, and to disseminate to somebody else. Each of us has his own myths. One of my myths, I think, is Ronald Coase. Maybe you know him. And, he basically won the Nobel Prize for 2 articles. And these 2 articles, they change completely the perspective we see the field, we see the reality. So if you want to have a good reading, I strongly recommend, if you didn't do it yet, to read the introduction he wrote for The Nature of the Firm. I think it's called Williamson. And he basically presents how he developed his new idea. And how he developed his new idea basically was confronting the reality that he was seeing as a PhD student traveling in the US with huge companies like Ford, like General Motors, with the books. Economics book at the time only speak about markets. And he was looking at the reality. I don't see any market. I see a huge company where a transaction appear within the company. And then you know the story. So I think we need to try to be scholar like him or several other, because we need to try to have an impact on how we think and how we develop our research. There are a lot of tentative in this direction. Maybe, I don't know, if my friend was speaking about RBM. So there are tentative to make responsibility on research. Maybe you are familiar with COARA. COARA is trying to give a different assessment about research. And the big question is, around us, there are stakeholders that pay our courses, they pay our research, and they want to see which value are these academics providing for us. This is what I would like to see. And now I see what I see. What I see is, no names clearly, but there are people that only count on their H index, people that only count on their citation, people that are every day are posting a new rankings where they are top 2% in the world. Well, some of these people are excellent scholars. I don't argue this. But some of them are playing games. And we need to be very frank and sincere among all of us. And so there are a lot of gray area in research, like arcing or salami slicing, and most of these people are playing this. But some of these people also playing the wrong game. There is plagiarism, data falsification, ghost authorship. They create, there are people who also get money to be involved in a paper they don't know even about the topic, the research, and so on. I assume I'm not the only one that is concerned about this and know that this is happening. So for me, the big challenge we have in front of us is to become real, passionate academics that want to have an impact on academy and the world. And so we need to really change our perspective. And I want to finish with a quote by Albert Einstein. That Albert Einstein said, there are things we can count. And we are putting, I had personally, too much emphasis in what we can count. Only that can be valuable. But there are also things that count. And we need to put more emphasis on these things if we want to improve our research standard. That's it.
Fantastic. Peter, challenges and opportunities that you'd like to see in the future of management research? You've got a choice. You can have that mic now. You've got all the mics.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Katy. That's a fabulous range, a fabulous portfolio of topics and content of our research. And Alexandra, I mean, that's a good trip through the worries and concerns that we have around the process of research. And my big challenge is also one of our biggest opportunities. And the biggest challenge that I see when I go around schools and when I go around particularly schools in less developed countries or less developed areas is, what do the deans do for their younger scholars? And the answer I get back from many deans is, we do a great deal for them. They all have mentors. They all get money to do this and that, different conferences. They can all earn money if they publish in the FT50. What? How many articles do you expect them to publish in the FT50? Or at least 2 in the first 5 years. And last week, in a conference for RRBM in Cambridge, I heard that one American university wants 2 papers in the FT50 in the first year out of doctoral studies to get any chance of getting on the tenure track. Deans respond in that way because they're defending the system that they're engaged with. My problem with it is a lot of the piece, jigsaw of that system is laid in concrete. It's path dependent. It's difficult to change. Now, in RRBM, the Responsible Research for Business and Management movement, we've managed to push some of that concrete back and dig some of it up. And we've convinced many editors to produce special issues on the sorts of topics that Katy was talking about, and others besides. Equally, we've tried to convince the accreditation agencies, especially AACSB and EQUIS, to change the emphasis in their statutes towards responsible research, the type of practice studies that we need for the social good, and also the types of methodological approaches that we need to bring good science back into the business school community. Because the sorts of issues that Alexandra was talking about are replete. If I'm sitting on a judgment panel for a best paper, for instance, the first thing I'll check is, when I've read the paper, of course, is whether that's been retracted at any stage or not, or the author has been retracted at any stage. For this profession to have a retractwatch.com that monitors papers every day is symptomatic of the sort of problems that we have. So it's a similar sort of issue to this, Chair, but it goes deeper. When we go on the road with RRBM, we go to Eastern Europe, or we go to India, or we go to West Africa is coming up, the first thing we're asked by many of the young scholars and PhD students is, what can you do about this? What can you do about this race to the FT50? What can you do about that system out there that we can't survive in it? We don't have the skills to survive in it. It's come from a publish-or-perish culture that's created a lot of mental strife amongst academics. So what are we going to do about it as an academy, as a group of people, with a lot of people who have limited access to the system that made many of us professionals in our own profession? Thank you, John.
Andy, same to you.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, fellow panelists. A very inspiring insight so far, and there's not much to disagree with. I'll say 2 points on this. One would be, are you asking the right people this question, Steve? Right? So the future of management research is not us, right? We are the past. The future is many of our early career researchers, PhD students, lots of people who are just getting started. And so I think we also have to ask the question, what do you want to see as the future of management research? What should it look like? And so I think when we come to the Q&A, despite Steve's very important comments about nobody rambling, don't be afraid to speak up and tell us what you'd like to see for the future of management research. And whether you're a PhD student, an early career scholar, whichever country you come from, whatever seniority you have, whether you're a woman, minority, or anybody else, we want to hear from you. And it doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment. So that's the first thing, is we need to make sure that we do less telling people how to survive in this system and do a bit more asking what kind of system do we want to see and how can we enable you to thrive in that kind of system. And the second point I want to say is really about this impact piece that Alessandro brought up, because it's absolutely crucial, I think, to the ongoing legitimacy of our profession. Let's face it, most of the research that we produce as an academy has very little influence on society, has very little influence in academia, right? Most papers don't get cited by anybody at all. And certainly they don't get read by managers, they don't get read by NGOs, by policymakers. How can we change the system so that the research that we produce has a meaningful impact on the world? And the tension here, I mean, Alessandro pointed out an important one, that people are very focused on their own citation rates, on the performance metrics that Peter was talking about, that deans are focusing on. And us as individual academics, as journals are increasingly raising their standards, they're asking for more and more methodological sophistication, more and more theoretical sophistication. It's getting harder and harder to publish in journals. Everyone, though, is trying to push at the same journals as Peter was talking about. Everyone's aiming for top tier. So there's a huge scramble to do this, but this also comes with the threat to doing research that has very little practical relevance. So we get pushed increasingly into irrelevance. And we are doing it to ourselves. It's our choice to do it. It's our institutions, it's our academy, it's our choice to do this. Hence my encouragement to choose another way. And we can choose. There is a sense of an institution around us. I agree, Peter. It's not easy to change, but things can change. And it's important. This is a problem because of the legitimacy of our profession. We remain challenged in legitimacy in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of politicians who support us and fund us. We also risk wasting a colossal amount of money. A recent estimate suggested that something like $400,000 is the cost of a single top-tier publication. $400,000 for a single publication. That's a lot of money for a paper that might get read by 10 people and has no impact in society at all. Now, there's lots of good things happening that are trying to address this. RRBM is one, there are many others. All of you will have seen, hopefully in your packs, our Research for Good publication that we have here at Bath about some of the ways that we're trying to do research that makes a difference in society. There's interesting things happening, but we have this ongoing tension still. How do we change the metrics, the systems, the expectations, the demands to publish in top-tier journals, whilst also having this kind of impact in society? What we don't want to do is throw away our methodological rigor, our theoretical insight. These are the things that make us different, I think, as researchers, as scholars, if we compare ourselves to consultants or contract researchers or think tanks. What we do is important, but we must find ways to harness this theoretical and empirical rigor with real-world impact. I have some suggestions for how we might do that, but I'm also interested in what other people have to say, so I'll finish there. Thank you.
You can hold on to it for now, Andy. Katy, maybe with those, I was intrigued by your use of the word radical, as well as encouragement to think about multi and transdisciplinary work. Can you share some of hopes and frustrations from the vantage point of somebody who's had a great deal of success in interdisciplinary research, multidisciplinary research?
Yeah, so in terms of hopes, I think the picture is very positive. So when I spend time with PhD students, I do get the sense that they really want to change the world, that they're born different, they've been born into a different world and into a different public discourse. So there's that mindfulness, and I believe the energy and the will is there. I think there's an out so practical as a good theory. So I really believe in the value of theory and good conceptualization. And so with transdisciplinary research, where you're framing research problems with practitioners, whether they be policymakers or business practitioners or public sector, I think with those people, we can learn to conceptualize and theorize differently with them and for them. And so it becomes not about us without us. And we see them as intellectuals in our world, as well as us being practitioners in their world. And, you know, Anne Cunliffe's been writing about this for a long time, and the practicing researcher, researching practitioner, a flip, I think, is something that we can do more to support PhDs with thinking about. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And then the other thing that I've seen in recent years, which I think has been powerful, but I think the business and management schools have been slower to engage with, are the establishment of research institutes and research centres in universities. These are designed usually, or at least conceptualised, as interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary institutions focused on phenomena to take a really wicked problem approach to it. However, I think we have been slow to walk out of our offices and to walk across campus. And I think part of that is because it's quite a frightening thing to do. And being able to recognise that in ourselves and as a community is a really important first step. And then to ask our Associate Dean for Research and research directors in our department, how can we open the door? Can we invite somebody in to come and talk to us in our comfort zone so we can understand what's going on out there? And then I think there are opportunities to speak to people about a very different breed of research. So for business and management research, not all, but many of us are privileged enough to have 40% workload attributed to research, which is paid for by the huge amount of teaching that we do and the big amount of money that we bring in. That might all change, right? But our colleagues across campus aren't that privileged. They may have 20%, they may have less than that, and they have to earn their research time by bringing in money, which means they have to have very competitive research proposals, which means they've thought about what they want to do a lot, and they've started to co-opt people into that process to try and get that money. When they have that money, they then have resource to do much more ambitious and much more complex types of research, and the time and space to do it, and the administrative support that's brought in, usually for 2 years, 3 years to do it. Having conversation with those people and learning that different world, I think, could be really beneficial to the value of research that we can deliver as a community. We don't suddenly have to become principal investigators on £5 million, £10 million bids, although that would be nice. But what we can do is bring our expertise to that conversation and do our thing in that bigger projectized, agenda-driven, impact-driven world, and then take a step back, get out of the cycle and write our 4-star papers and theorize well and conceptualize well. And I think that creates a real opportunity for us to act and do differently.
Fantastic. Peter, you've touched on the RRBM, and there's a project here of institutional change. I wonder whether you could say a bit more about the RRBM particularly, but then also reflect a bit more on how, as individuals, as groups of individuals, as communities, we can play a bigger role in changing the institutions that are reinforcing some of the things that we might want to see less of.
Gosh, you want the answer.
I do.
Now, thank you for the question. It's a challenging one. RRBM was set up in 2015-2016. It stands for Responsible Research in Business and Management. It was set up by 25 scholars, senior editors, presidents of academies and so on, who were concerned about two things in particular that have been mentioned here by Andrew and by Alexandro. First of all was the poverty of science underpinning a lot of the business and management research. And there are a lot of issues in the science besides harking and p-hacking. A lot of plagiarism has been described. And that was frightening. The scale of that was absolutely frightening. It became a small publication industry on its own, describing the mess that we were in. In strategy in particular, my own area, around about 66% of the final output in terms of articles was seen to be pretty dodgy. When you think about that, how many people have been taught, how many companies and colleagues and consultants have been advised based upon that kind of science? That's a difficult one for us. But it's not just strategy, it's right across the board. So it was, RRBM developed 7 principles, 3 of which would address those sort of issues on the dodgy science. One of them was to talk quite long and quite healthily about the balance between applied and theoretical research. Nothing wrong with blue sky research, nothing wrong with good conceptual and good theoretical research. But the applied part of research in many institutions was seen to be a dirty cousin of good theoretical work. If you were engaged with businesses, if you were engaged with industry, it was seen to be getting your hands dirtier than they need to be. You would need a shower when you came back to your university. It was to redress that balance, to keep the balance between applied and theory together. Also, to look carefully at the methodological components and not to confuse methodology with method. Many senior scholars in papers make that confusion. Methodology is the systematic comparison of available methods to research that phenomena. Method itself is what you choose in the end as a superior method to research it. Improving that methodological component. And finally, pluralistic and multidisciplinary research was a prime principle. Now, those of you who've been engaged in multidisciplinary research, like Katy has said, this is slow research. This is not fast research. It's not quick research. That's not going to get those 2 papers in the FT50 in the first year out of doc program. This is slow research. It takes time. Putting the teams together takes time. Understanding the disciplines takes time. I have a research project at the moment on the alleviation of poverty in Scotland. And I'm working with sociologists, psychologists, economists, and people from the humanities who understand lived poverty. The project's going really well, and the government of Scotland has got a lot of really good policy advice so far. But can we write a paper together? It's virtually impossible. We don't understand each other. But we've been 3 years into the project. It's 5 years funded. By the end of 5 years, we might understand each other better. But don't underestimate the difficulties you will have. You've got to park your ego and work alongside people you never thought you were going to work alongside. The other 3 principles very quickly about RRBM, which will address the very practice issues that I think Andrew was trying to get at. One of them is the engagement with stakeholders right at the start of your research. Not waiting to the end to figure out who your stakeholders are. Start right at the beginning and engage them in the conceptual work about what needs to be researched. In the middle, engage them again when you're talking about your results and the potential impact on other stakeholders that we haven't engaged with at the moment. And finally, much broader systems of dissemination, not just the top 50, but engage in a bit of podcasting, engage in more practitioner journals, get involved with the institutes who are brilliant at articulating academic results into their own membership. So become a much more broader in your vision of to how that dissemination takes place. And finally, make sure that that good research you're doing, and that very practical research you're doing, has an impact on the common good of society. And now that RRBM from 35 people is now 2,500 strong, hitting the journals, hitting the accreditation agencies, both, as I said before, both AACSB and EQUIS have changed their statutes as a result of the pressure put upon them by RRBM, and now expect deans to have in their school systems of reward for the practical research that we want to garner. I'll leave it at that just for the moment.
I'll play the pantomime villain as the standing dean, and I'll say, okay, so I'm still in the same way as if I evaluate people's outputs, I can do that relatively straightforwardly. What is happening in the world of alt metrics, impact metrics, and so on, that helps me as a dean understand the impact that colleagues are having? How can I, thinking about a community that I lead, gain a better sense of the impact of that work in various senses? I'd be Andy, if you'd like to start on that one.
Yeah, put me in the hot seat. You are my dean, specifically. So how would I like you to evaluate me, could be the question. And likewise, how would some of our early career scholars in the room like to be evaluated for the impact that they achieve? It's a bit of a mess, is the answer so far, right, in terms of where we currently are in measuring real-world impact. If we want to measure scholarly impact, let's start with that one. Things are changing. Slowly but surely, and I would say they're moving from more generalized metrics, which would assess the quality of a journal. There are A journals and B journals and C journals. We're all deep, deep, deep in the woods of that one. To more individualized metrics, right? So individual metrics for papers. So even if you're published in a lower ranked journal, you may have a very high impact paper. And I think that shift towards more individualized metrics are significant. Because if you can show that your paper has been downloaded 1,000 times, has been cited 100 times, wherever it's been published, it shows that you've had scholarly impact, or at least you're starting to. So I think those things are actually, I get the sense they're quite helpful to us as individual scholars, notwithstanding, as Alessandro said, how people come to fetishize them over time and start bragging about their H-index and talking about how long their publication list is and how big their H-index is. You know, these things get very boring very quickly. But it does give us some kind of ammunition against the dean, with the dean, towards the dean, about our own performance. With real-world impact, it's much more difficult. We do have things like Outmetrics, again, which is done on an individualized level, which measures more of the media and social media impact of an individual paper. I think these are interesting metrics. They give you some indication. It's not impact. It's whether it's been picked up in the media, but that's part of our pathway to impact. The publisher Sage now produces something called Sage Policy Profiles. It's a fantastic resource if you want to take a look at it. And this measures how many pieces of policy publications your work has been cited in. So I checked mine before I came on stage today, and it's something like 100 different citations in more than 100 different policy documents. And when you think about it, that's like, okay, that's nice to know. Like, your work has had impact in policy documents. It still doesn't demonstrate that the world has changed as a result of your research, but it's part of that pathway. And then when we get to the actual, has anything changed as a result of your research? What can you use? Well, then we don't really have hard metrics. And I don't think we should have hard metrics, because each type of impact is qualitatively different from the next. And so there is much more of a kind of narrative account, I think, that we have to make to explain the type of impact that we've made. Here in the UK, we have something called the Research Evaluation Framework, which requires universities to report on particular impact cases, where specific academics will show how their research has been translated into practical impact. People complain about the REF all the time, but I think that part of it has been fantastic in terms of putting impact at the heart of what a dean cares about, and gives us the kind of ammunition as academics to say, okay, if I do an impact case, this is going to manifestly affect the rating, the evaluation of the school, therefore this is valuable activity that I should be supported and evaluated on. So I think we're going some way. There are other ways in which impact is evaluated. There's typically prizes will be used. The FT has prizes, RBM has prizes, different divisions of the Academy of Management, other places have prizes for impact. Those are great. Again, they help us to show to people the kind of impact that we have. As academics, I think we always have to be cautious of the metrics that we end up with, because we do get, these become burdens upon us. But at the same time, without metrics for things like real-world impact, it's not going to be counted as important enough, and therefore the resources are not going to be allocated to it. So I have a love-hate relationship always with metrics, but in this area, I do think we need them. I think we need better ones, but we shouldn't move towards wholly quantified ones.
Yeah, really, really interesting thoughts. Alessandro, can I ask you a question about the role of scholarly societies in this transition? As EURAM's a major scholarly society in management. How is EURAM? How might EURAM support the future of management research that you'd like to see as president?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. EURAM typically since many years is supporting grants. Maybe if you attended the general meeting we have before, you can see that we have grants every year. We have awards, as we said, for the best paper, the most inspirational. And it's great to see sometime like today that a doctoral student can win the most inspirational paper. This is something that for us is quite important. And we want to also create new awards. There will be in the future an educator award. Also teaching is part of our job and is also very impactful. We sometimes undermine teaching, but we can really have an impact as a role model for several people. One on an emerging scholar, junior scholar with a brilliant trajectory of research, and also one on an impactful scholar, someone that really, as we basically share here, had an impact on society. But I want to tell also about a project that I think is quite important for me and refer to something that Katy said before. So sometimes to have a big impact, I think you need to have a lot of money or an ambitious research project. And as you probably know, in Europe, we have some of these very big grants. The most important one, I think, is ERC. I guess you know what is ERC. I think years ago, it was not very popular among us, management scholars. But now in my university, I guess in your university, it's getting more attention, and everybody is really curious to see if we will have a winner soon, not only among the economists, but also among the management scholars in our university. And this is a typical project that underlines the EURAM spirit. It has been started by former president. They organized a symposium. They tried to create a link with the ERC committee. Then Panos organized a webinar where we presented to all our members how to apply the different rules, the different type of programs. And we are continuing a dialogue with them, with Panos. We are trying to have interaction. They are always very welcoming for us, so this is a good news. And some of us also were involved as a panelist, so they were involved also to see what happened on the other side. In some discussion this day with some of the EURAM people, I think there are two different views on this project. One view is very negative, and one view said it's an economist game. They have their own rules and their way to assess research, and we just are wasting time. And we will never be successful. Why do we need to try? We try to be very open and frank. Panos, you can testimony that we try. We try to speak with these people and say, can we have only one panel for management? Because this will be ideal. Currently, we are together, the economists. And they said, maybe you can try, but you need to try with the political support. So you need to go to the Prime Minister or the Minister of Education of your country and try to go to the political side and try to change. Because if we change one panel, all other panels will be against us. So either at the European level, the Commission, they will have the force, they will be so powerful to change it, or it will be impossible. Okay, I'm personally not a friend of any Prime Minister, so we decided to play a different game. So what we decided to do was trying to educate, encourage all of you to try to play with the current rule. And the current rules, what we can do is only one issue, is to submit more management projects to the ERC. And there are different levels. You know, there are junior, mid-career, senior. Now they created also synergy. There are different types of grants. Why this is important? Well, first of all, it's important because we eliminate this research that is not very ambitious and not impactful, but you can try to have a project that will be impactful and eventually one day will be financed. Second, if they will have more management projects, we will have more management scholars in the panel. Because clearly, you know, imagine that you are one ERC member. You receive 100 projects, and then 99 are for an economic side, and one from management. Who will include in the panel? Economists. This is quite clear. And the people in the panel are very welcoming us because the funds are distributed based on the number of projects they receive. So if we submit more projects, our panel will receive more funds. If there are more management projects, we will have more members in the committee. It seems to be a long way. I agree, it's a long way. It's a challenge because if you become a member of the panel, you need to do a lot of work. And it's not paid like Prime Minister, obviously. It's a work that you get some reimbursement. But I think it's worth to try because if one of us, one EURAM member, will get this grant, it will change the story. It will change the story and it will be very clear that management scholar can appeal, and can get the grant, and can be able to do a very high impactful research. So to this purpose, together with Panos, we try to do something to support you. So if you are a young scholar, and if you pass the first round, or at least you get a positive evaluation, EURAM will give you money. We'll give you money because we want to recognize that you did a good step and you were successful. Second, the ERC people told us the first time is very difficult. You receive comment, redevelop your project, and then resubmit. This is quite normal. They said several people win maybe the second or the third or even the fourth round because every time you learn how to do it. And we can also organize another webinar. We can also organize some more support for all of you. But I think if one of us will be able to get there, we will change the rule of the game and we will change the perspective. So I think sometimes we need to be ambitious and we need to try to do something that today maybe you think is too ambitious, maybe it's impossible to do it, but when some of us will do it, will be a different world. Thank you.
Thanks, Alessandro. So that leads very nicely, I think, onto two last questions that I might point in generally your way. How do we resource the management research of the future? We're in a difficult external environment. As you said, Katy, at the moment we get quite a lot of time for free, but will that last into the future? I think that's an interesting question. How do we resource and how should we resource the management research of the future that we really like to see? If I direct that to you, Katy, then I've got a different one for you guys.
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. I think there's a misconception from, there's a misconception from other disciplines sometimes that business will pay for business and management research. Well, they don't want to. I don't know why, but they don't want to. Not very often. Anyway, I think there are opportunities for us to be part of bids led by science. So just to give you an example of something that I've been working on with colleagues at the moment, we've been looking at agrivoltaics. We have a fantastic environmental scientist at Lancaster and a fantastic colleague that we work with at Imperial who understands the physics of solar panels. And we've been thinking about the need for green energy and the need to use land for producing food, but also producing energy. Solar panels take up a lot of space. There are all sorts of issues around this wicked problem, around circular economy for panels, panels coming from overseas, managing panels, using panels to house and protect biodiversity, as well as increase the nutritional value of food. So can you do all that and join it together? That's a really wicked problem. Now that speaks to multiple interests with multiple sources of money. So if you can look at bringing those wicked problems together and target different funding bodies and help the funding bodies start to ask questions in a different way, I think we can be part of that. And so what it takes for us to do is step forward and say, I have expertise in X. I can help businesses develop a strategy to think about that. I can help farmers develop their business model to do that. I can help agrivoltaic innovation and development investors think about how they support this type of activity. And we have the skills and expertise to do that. The scientists don't always have the questions like that at their fingertips, and that's why we need to come out of our offices and engage with scientific agendas that we're perhaps not always comfortable with engaging with or know a lot about. But the point is that we don't have to know everything. We just have to know what we know and be able to articulate it in a way that's accessible and meaningful to non-experts. And then I think the other thing that we can do is most governments have a lot of money and a lot of money in relation to what we're used to spending on a research project, right? So I would say for many years in business and management, if I got £5,000 for a research project, that was pretty darn good, right? And then suddenly I'm working with, in the UK government, a Department of Digital, I always get this wrong, Digital DCMS, Digital Culture, Media and Sport. Yeah, that's it. And they want to connect 5G technology in very rural areas to try and boost rural economies. So they're investing in £5-6 million projects, and not only that, they want to join the projects up, and not only that, that's people from science and technology with people from social sciences, people with consumer behaviour that understand what's going on in villages, and you've got to connect all this stuff up together. And again, we can step forward into those research environments. And some of the work we're doing is actually just working with people, but then to be creative in how we think about and develop our methods, just as Peter was saying, there's masses of opportunities to use this as a playground and to put our theories into use. And to, instead of using twists in journals for framing, we use practical context to create those twists and to help us see anew and afresh and develop practical insight that can then be conceptualized and theorized backwards. So I think all those are places where we can play, where resources are currently being directed. And that means we need to act differently as researchers. We need to start looking at the agenda of the research agencies, looking at the science agenda and seeing where the money's flowing so that we can step into that playground.
Fantastic, thanks. The corollary of the resourcing question, I think, is an inclusion and exclusion question. How do we make sure that the future of management research is inclusive? What can we do in our communities to help make that more inclusive reality come to bear? And maybe I'll start with you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I mean, as we said, publishing is expensive and time-consuming and extraordinarily hard work. getting impact from your research is even more so, right? We're talking sometimes years and years, decades, to build the kind of relationships that are necessary with practitioners, with people in the field, with NGOs, with policymakers, to build those relationships so that our work has impact. So it takes huge resources to make these things happen. It takes networks, it takes connections. And who has all these resources, networks, connections, money, and time? Well, it's not everybody. And it's the elite institutions that have more of it, and the institutions at the bottom that have less of it. And, again, we're possibly not the right people to ask because, we're all from, relatively speaking, elite institutions. What can we do, though, is the question, to help others that don't have access to the same kind of resources? We're in a game, we're in a race where effectively, we have, in many respects, the best sports equipment known to man in this race, whereas the others who are participating in the same race are running with no shoes, with rags and with 100-pound weights strapped to their backs, right? It's not a fair race in that sense. So if you're from a lower or middle income country, if you're even from a high income country, but at a university with a much lower set of resources, there's much less opportunity to get involved in publishing in the top tier journals in the same way because it's so expensive and time consuming and resource intensive to do so, and to get the kind of impact. So what do? Well, we have to work in collaboration, I think, with those institutions. Particularly if we think about lower middle income countries, many of the grand challenges that many of us have been talking about at this conference, these are things that happen far away. And when we go and do research around these challenges, we need to build in local researchers as active, well-resourced participants in those projects, I think. Absolutely crucial to have a more equitable and inclusive approach to the kind of research that we do, including participants in the research, rewarding participants who might be the people who are going to benefit from our research, is another way of doing this. When it comes to the kind of research skills and how can we disseminate the kind of skills that we develop, I think it's really important that we think about ways to transmit the knowledge that we have about accessing journals, the kind of networks that we have into editors of journals, to those that have much less access to them. Peter, you were talking about schools in Africa. How often do you get a panel of editors from top-tier management journals talking to scholars in these places? It's very rare. So we have to create opportunities. It's one thing that I've been doing over the last few years with the Prime organization, PRME. We've been doing a world tour where we've been doing online research development workshops all around the world with scholars from different countries, doing editor panels, giving feedback on papers, doing mentorship. These things are super important to try and provide greater access and resources. And here at Bath, we've been developing something called our GEAR program, where we've been, again, trying to provide the kind of knowledge and skills necessary to develop strong publications for researchers from low and middle income countries. These are important ways that we can share the resources that we have to enable others to have the same opportunities, but also in ways that solve the problems better, because these are researchers that are right close to the problem, that understand them in a much more embodied, much more kind of deep way, who are connected to the communities that we're interested in trying to solve their problems. So we need to work with them and not just parachute in and try and devise solutions kind of abstract from the real world in which they're happening.
Peter, maybe a word on RRBM and inclusion in research?
Sorry, say again.
A word on, again, inclusion in research, the role of RRBM, other things you've been doing that you think are important to make sure that the future of management research isn't only more engaged, but is also more inclusive.
Yeah, I think one thing RRBM is doing now is co-joint project work with Prime. His conference last week was together with Prime, organized together with Prime in two parts. The first part was in the UK, and the second part is next year in New York. So in other words, we can't solve the issues that we've described from this panel atomistically. There has to be a lot more cooperation between the agencies involved. Some of the agencies are acting as anchors on the forward progress that we're trying to make. And I can mention some of them here. I mean, some of the publishers, for instance, to whom we sold our soul in developing the rankings and ratings tables, and therefore the whole disease that went with all of that. We were talking to the FT last week, to Andrew Jack. And they have a strong list, that's for sure. And they sell a lot of newspapers based upon that list, that's for sure. But what Andrew told us in RRBM last week was they're going to produce yet another university ranking. So wait a minute. Isn't it time that through cooperation with RRBM and Prime and others and academies, BAM and EURAM, that we start to push back and we start to take the mantle ourselves and move it forward to the sort of future for research that we want, that makes it easier for our younger and our junior scholars to climb a ladder, that those of us who have managed to climb it in the past climbed it under pretty raucous conditions. We make it easier. We're more careful about their mental health while they're doing it. Because our responsibility, and the future is part to do with us, Andrew, it's not entirely uncoupled from where we are now, because we can move those doors and we can make those connections because of where we are. Junior scholars can't do that. But we can't do it atomistically. We have to do it together and bring the institutions together who are going to push it forward and punish and push back on those institutions that are trying to hold us back. I don't want to be a bully, but I think sometimes we have to.
Fabulous. I've absorbed enough of your collective time, and I hope that's been an interesting conversation. It's time, it feels to me, to get our mics running out into the audience for folks who might have questions. We might hand that off to somebody who will be happy to. We might therefore need to use these a bit better. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Who's got some questions? I see Petra over there with her hand up. If others have questions, you can put your hand up and we'll get the other mic coming to you. No. I don't think you need to press anything, Petra. I think it's...
Can you now? Now
Yeah,
you can
there you
hear. Okay, as I have several, actually, thanks so much for the interesting discussion. I have loads of questions. I will try to make one short one and one long one. One is about prescriptive theorizing, because I think it's quite interesting that we maybe have some of the things we might want to solve in the future. We need prescriptive theorizing, and at the moment I have the feeling to publish about prescriptive theorizing is still quite hard. So if you could say something about this. And the other one is that I think for a lot of things, like as in my area, as some of you might know, I'm in greenhouse gas management, carbon management. It's not an established field, so it's kind of everywhere a little bit. And people who are actually trying to publish in this area, it's really much harder. Also, for example, this morning I was listening to a PhD looking at how to relate financial performance to carbon performance of a company. Financial performance, we have loads of things we can build on, lots of literature already. The moment we try to kind of get actually big data on carbon performance, we first of all have problem to get the data, because even the companies are struggling with scope 3 and how to publish all this data and collect it. And in addition, we have nothing the PhD student can build upon, where there's a nice field in the literature where they can say, here, this is what I'm building on. So I think people who are working in this field are really disadvantaged and don't get, as not only that they maybe change in their mind and say, oh, actually, I just publish about financial performance because this is easy and I get something published. But they might actually, and I think it's a loss for us all, because we need the answers for the more tricky bits, but where they maybe need more support and more, I think, openness from the established editors in the journals to say, okay, we are allowing, or we are actually encouraging, we are supporting young researchers who are in this field to actually get something in the established journals? And I think this is my second question. Could we do this, and how could we do this?
Thank you. So descriptive theory and the perils of being radical, being at the ragged edge. Who wants to go?
Let me say something. Thanks, Petra. I think on prescriptive theorizing, it's a very interesting question. I would tend to agree with you. I think we do need more of it, given that we're talking about how things need to be, how things should be in the future, how do we solve problems, how do we change societies, how do we re-envisage our kind of response to grand challenges. And so sometimes that does take a more prescriptive type of approach. My sense is the door is opening at journals around this, and so the question then becomes because there is an awareness, as we've all discussed here, around the kind of the need to tackle these problems. And so then the challenge is, well, how do we kind of push that open door in a way that's more open? And I think we have to work hard at that. I think it's things like putting in proposals for special issues on prescriptive theorizing in management research. It's about doing sessions at conferences like this one around this topic. It's about building a coalition of researchers around this topic and giving it momentum. And so when we think we have ways or approaches that we think will be conducive to the direction of travel we want to go in, we have to build momentum around them. And that takes, it's the task of all of us to try and do that, to be those leaders. And that doesn't have to come from above. That comes from below, I think. It's about a group of committed people that want to build an approach and get it institutionalized over time. So, look for ways of taking that out into mainstream journals, into conferences, and all kinds of other things.
I'll take a shot at your second question, Petra, if I may, which I think has some of the similar attributes in the answer that Andrew has described. I think special issues are important because it seems to me you need to elevate the subject beyond where it is at the moment. And there are certain means to that elevation, certain tactics you can deploy. I think first, the special issues are a good vehicle for doing that, and finding editors who are capable and sensitive to that particular area. Secondly, organizations like EURAM are hitting a kind of growth target. We're hitting a ceiling where we can hold conferences now. So the idea of mini conferences on specific topics begins to emerge. And so you build a mini conference around keynote speakers who are pretty well known in that particular area, and you invite as many of the young scholars along as you possibly can. And hopefully you will get some financial support from organizations like EURAM in so doing. So it's finding a set of tactics where you can elevate the subject beyond where it is at the moment. So you can put a position of legitimacy against the multidisciplinary nature of that topic and the misunderstood nature of what it's trying to do. So get going with it.
Can I add something on descriptive theorizing? I think I was years ago in a struggle, in a very difficult situation because I was managing a special issue and two people disagree totally on what is, if there is a value or not. And typically there are people that believe if you don't have a strong theory and proposition, there is no value in a paper, while there are people that believe if you have a rich description is a theory per se. I think both views are valid. What I think could be good when you do descriptive theorizing is try to find something either that is totally new, that is a kind of discover, or a phenomena that we take for granted is going one direction and the data show is going totally in a different direction. Now, if you take Carl Weick papers, probably they give you a clear insight about how to draft this view that is totally different than expected, but is so rich that is per se a great theoretical contribution.
Hand up here, Shan.
Thank you. My question is why you haven't discussed how we can manage the future of humanity, which seems to be sleepwalking into disaster It's a topic I've brought up privately this morning with Alexander, Peter, and Steve. And I chatted up Steve to see if he would start a course to educate governance architects to so we could stop talking about management, which is just dictatorships, which are creating the problem that we're sleepwalking into disaster, and create the systems used by nature, which is polycentric governance. We heard the problems about authority from Voss, and he forgot to mention that the solution to centralised authority is distributed decision-making, and I know of no university in the world that teaches how to write constitutions of corporations to create distributed decision-making. And Petra was one of my supporters with the Academy of Management, who we got up a caucus for the EURAM to fill this educational gap. It's not management, because management is top-down, command and control, exploitive, alienating, troublemaking, toxic hierarchies. It's organisation. It's a different sort of organisation which mimics our own bodies of self-regulating and self-governing. Now, that's a huge global gap that nobody has addressed. So is it because you're committed to poisoning our society and training better Putins who can run dictatorships better than other people? That's what management is, the problem, not the solution. It's organisational change that we should be researching, which means learning from the physical scientists of how they design self-governing automobiles and spacecraft. But the knowledge is there in the physical science, but the social scientists have neglected to get it because it's not fashionable. And my good friends who I chatted up this morning haven't mentioned it so far, because perhaps, is there anybody in the room here that's got a business unit would like to try an experimental educational course on training governance architects to create new types of organisations which don't meet the paradigm of typical dictatorships, which are undermining democracy? So please contact me. My name is shan.turnbull@gmail.com. Thank you.
I'm going to take that as a statement and offer somebody else an opportunity to ask a question or make another statement. As gentleman down here.
Thank you very much. My question about the future of management per se, specifically about the relationship among companies. So far, we are talking about cooperation, collaboration among the companies, such as joint projects, such as open innovation. But what I have in my mind is far beyond it, so that the companies can work just like a single company, facing very serious issues, critical issues as human beings, such as energy conservation, such as natural resource conservation. I like to know your opinion about how far the companies can go. Of course, there are several issues, such as antitrust issues, but facing the serious situation as we have, or we are going to have, I think we have to change such kind of conditions. Do I communicate correctly?
I will frame that in the following way. So how can we as management researchers encourage companies and collectives of companies or other organisations to actions that are more compatible with a positive future for global society? Have at it, troops.
So I think even like just starting with changing the public discourse that comes out of universities is really, really important. We are ambassadors, I think, and we have to behave as such. I think there is a will with some organisations to do so, to collaborate and to work together. You know, the circular economy requires joint investment of resources, and it requires a collective effort, a coordinated effort, and government has a massive role in that. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that strikes me as absolutely pertinent here is we have the future sitting in our classrooms. You know, they will be the people that have to act in extreme urgency. They won't get a chance to learn. They won't have time for apprenticeships. We need to make them brave and bold and equip them to act in chaos. And so a new form of management will be born through this urgency that is coming down the road. And some of us can see it, and others of us have hands over our eyes and over our ears. And so the work that Peter is doing through RRBM, Andrew's work over many, many years, the work of EURAM and BAM, and we have many presidents from learned societies invited here as courtesy of EURAM to discuss some of these big issues, how we support, how we bring people together, and how we do this well. And I do feel a little bit speechless in that we are the history and we are the creators of this problem by teaching individualism, by teaching meritocracy, and infrastructuring a new future reality and supporting those that are brave enough to step forward is the only thing we can now do.
Peter.
I'll just add to that. I think it's a fascinating question, but it also points to the purpose of what we are and who we are as researchers in academia. We are not responsible for bringing together and bashing the heads together of massive corporations and saying, collaborate or die. Our job is to do the really good research that shows that that kind of collaboration is better than singular activity. I think the research angle of what we do is important, but secondly, I couldn't agree with Katy more. Our biggest impact from our research is through our research-driven teaching. And in the classroom, where we have thousands and hundreds of thousands of undergraduates and postgraduates running through into that work and convincing them that collaboration is much better because we've done really good research that says that, is a very powerful message to send out.
Can I add something? I think I totally agree with my colleagues, and I think education is still a powerful driver for change. And you know, we cannot underestimate the impact that we have as professor in class. Let me make an example. You know, when I was young, years ago, you know, I was trained in agency theory. And if you start with agency theory, you have a clear view about the world, no? People are individualistic, people are opportunistic, they will use asymmetry of information, and a simple recipe seems to be pay more, try to create incentive or create controls. Well, I think this is an ideology that partly is driving where we are today. Because if you create this ideology, they become self-fulfilling prophecy in reality. People become like this, they are nurtured by this ideology, and they tend to do exactly what we are thinking. So I think we have a responsibility as a teacher to provide different perspective and to see also, try to attack also some dominant dogma, because you know business also like dogma, because maybe they are in favor of the CEO compensation or the finance. So this perspective should be challenged by us as a scholar in research, but also in class, because people should be trained to think broadly in a different way. Otherwise, everything will go as it is.
Somebody down at the front here. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Oui? No? I try. I think that we can sing whatever we want if we are carrying on competing with each other, presenting each other by our statutes, our success, our number of journal articles, we won't succeed. Because you know, you are parents like me, your discourse does not count. You have to walk the talk. And we have to walk the talk by alliance between university, by cooperating inside our own world and trying to change the rules of the games that we are playing.
Anybody want to make a comment to how we change the rules of the game?
I would just like to speak to that. I think that's one missing bit from the UK Research Excellence Framework. So the impact bit is great, but actually what they're going to do is rank us and decide who gets money. So they're dividing, right? And that's a shame. That's a shame. So looking for criteria, and I think we have been quite good at setting we set our criteria for reference. It's our community that sets the criteria. So having frank discussions amongst ourselves and really pushing and putting the time in to influence how we choose to value ourselves and how we influence those who wish to evaluate us is going to be critical. I think collaboration between institutions, and again, I think we can learn from other disciplines about this, right? More practical experience, which is more expensive in education, more collaboration in research, and when we're doing interdisciplinary research, we name everybody who touched it, right? Then you don't have a fight about who has a 4-star paper because you've got 20 names on it. You never see that in management. You do see it all the time in physics, right? Where does the money go? So learning from other disciplines, thinking about collaboration and showing how we celebrate the power of collaboration to bring about change, I think is something that we can do. And I fully agree with your point.
More questions, folks? One over there.
Hi. Thank you for a very frank conversation coming from the more experienced researchers in the field. Do you think there is a gatekeeping in the academic publishing system? Because we know it's, blind review on paper, but it feels as if there is a repetition, like there are farms or industrial production facilities of some centralized, and you've been talking about the privilege of access to resources, but there is this feeling looking from the outside towards the inside, as if there is something beyond that going on as well, like same people appearing in the same line of publications, and I look at it in a number of years, 20 publications in the top journals. How is it that these people are able to even find the time, basically, to make a valuable contribution to a research, when I feel like I'm like an old-fashioned artisan taking 4 or 5 years to produce an A-level journal publication? It seems impossible looking in. It really takes away the motivation of young scholars to be able to, that self-efficacy becomes an issue when you look at that, and then they say, there's no way I can reach that. Whereas the context probably is also missing there. So I would like to get your opinions on that if possible. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Who wants to go? Gatekeeping, motivation in a long, low output career. How do we support people on those journeys? Is there a great conspiracy?
I wouldn't tell you if there was. Slow research. I think that's something to aspire to. I don't think, I think it was mentioned before around interdisciplinary research by Katy. But I think in general, it's an important aspect of what we do is some slowing down. So I wouldn't feel in any way that you've underperformed by taking a long time to produce good research. The reason, I think, why some people can produce so much high quality, top tier publications is because of the resources that are available to do so in certain institutions. And there are different types of schools, there are different types of training that people receive as a result of being in different types of PhD programs, the different networks that they're built into, and all of those things compound to give people certain advantages. And we operate, the more elite the school, the more it has a 2-tier system, which means that the people in the elite part of those tiers do very little teaching, do lots of time for research, and they produce all these top-tier publications. The second tier are the part-time instructors, the kind of adjuncts, the people that actually do all of the teaching. Particularly in North American schools, this is a very common approach, in certain elite schools in Europe as well. So the system is built to do that. And that can only really be fair or inclusive if there's also a rewards, a kind of pathway to promotion, to rewards for the people in the second tier. And usually there's not, right? And that is a real problem, I think, in terms of how particularly elite academia is structured. And it has to change, right? Because that is the system that has pushed us towards, you know, our whole system of publication is falling apart, right? You talk about all these papers being published. If you have any journal editors here or people that work as associate editors, the number of papers that every journal is receiving now is incredible, and the number of reviewers that you need is incredible, and there's just not the resources in the system to keep it going. So we're at an interesting time where we do need to change the system of publication, of how the kind of infrastructure of journals work, and of how elite academia works. So we have opportunities we've hit an inflection point, I think. So now is a time to think about what the alternative looks like and how we can get there. But I don't think there's a shadowy cabal of people kind of deciding what's going to be published and what's not. It simply is a matter of very unequal access to resources.
Just two comments, really. I don't think they're direct answers to what you said, but what I'd like to do is record your question, and we'll put it on the EURAM website, because it's a warning to a lot of scholars in this profession. It's what we're trying to do in RRBM. But just thinking, one of our former presidents, Morton Hughes, who's sitting in the front row here, published a book 2 years ago, Morton. And the book is, I'd like to give you a reference to figure 9.1 in the book, which is comparing and contrasting who does what at each stage of their career. And I think that book, that answer lies in that figure and that graph on there. If you want to do slow research, you have to have a parallel processing act going on. You have to do the quick research in collaboration with senior scholars who are doing this, who have the time to do the slow research.
There was somebody at the back. Perhaps for a last question, I'm mindful time is ebbing away.
Thank you. I have just a quick question. I might be wrong. My understanding from academia is that we are quite conservative and slow in responding to everything around the world. Economy, sustainability, political issues, and everything. So do you think that when we are talking about let's make the change impact with research in every aspect, do you think it is in contradiction with our very conservative approach to responding to the environment? And also my second question is that, don't you think that we should rethink the concept of meritocracy, because there is a privilege, like rewarding the privilege, basically?
Fantastic last question. Are we radical enough? Can we be more radical? Should we be more radical? And how do we make the future we aspire to fair?
Can I start by saying something about teams? So we've got used to, like you guys, early career people, you need to publish in the top journals. You need to be fantastic educators, which is a completely different way of being. So, and you can only do that if you're a fantastic researcher. So you need research skills, you need engagement skills, because you can't get great data unless you know how to engage and who to engage with and blah, blah, blah. And then you need to be a fantastic communicator to engage with students and inspire students. And then you need to make sure you're in the media. And then you also need to have these really finely honed crafting skills that you get by hanging around in the right places with the right people who already have those and doing it like an apprenticeship. I think Bill Starbuck, who writes beautifully, says that by draft 7, he's kind of got a first draft. Draft 7 of working through and working through. Writing papers is really hard in our discipline in a way that it just isn't in physics. And yet physics put everybody's name on that touches a thing, and we don't, right? So 1 person, 2 persons, maybe 3 get the glory, and all the people that opened the doors, created the platforms, they don't touch the project. So what if we worked together? What if we collaborated? What if we had teams where somebody did the data collection, somebody specialized in crafting papers, and the team delivered the output, right? Not 3 people, a proper team. And what if we did that across institutions? I think we could open up to be much more ambitious and much more impactful in the type of outputs that we deliver. I don't take anything away from theory. I believe that investing in learning how to theorize and conceptualize makes you a better data collector, but I don't think everybody has to do everything on their own all the time.
Just a quick one. We're talking here about the future of management research. We can't decouple that from the future of management education because it's a similar ecosystem. And if we look at the future of management education, there's a lot of work at the moment, including from people in the audience, that's looking at the transformation of that system over the next 10 to 20 years. There are far too many providers of business and management. People will go bust. The circumstances in 10 years' time, the playing field will be very different from what they are now for research and for teaching. So that's exactly the kind of conditions that gives you chance for creativity. That's where entrepreneurs thrive. That's where you can perform at the edge. Because I think, I'll leave on a personal note, there's been far too much research produced in business and management over the last 10 years. A spike that's like a ski curve. Over 310,000 papers in top journals. What are we doing with that? That's just too much for anybody to read. The system is at breaking point, and it must break to get the sort of change where you can be that marginal fringe actor.
Last thoughts, Alessandro, Andy?
Yeah, I'll say on the question of are universities conservative, and does that mean that we're not going to be able to face this problem? I mean, I think one advantage of having the kind of old people at the top of the room here is that we have seen changes. I mean, I've been in this profession for 30 years, and I started my PhD 30 years ago this year. And it's changed beyond recognition from what it was like when I started, both in terms, you know, my researches are all around kind of sustainability, business responsibility. I was the one person in my department as a PhD student. There were no faculty doing research on that. I was the weird guy down the end of the corridor doing this kind of ethics stuff. Now, I think at the time there were 2 full professors in the whole of the UK that focused on corporate responsibility when I started in 1994. Now there's more professors in my school than that focus on those topics, and you know, almost half the faculty in the School of Management here do research that tackles issues of sustainability. You know, the change has been phenomenal in terms of the shift in attention towards these issues that matter over the past 30 years. So although you've probably heard a lot of pessimism from some of us at the front here, it is also, you know, there's so much change can happen and has happened. And I would say, think about the future that you want, and then we can start to make it happen, because it can happen. Universities are conservative, but the people within them are not.
Trying to provide my view on such a big question, I think sometimes we tend to become a bit pessimistic because we are thinking only about within the box. Within the box means research only in the top 50, in the top 20, in the top 5. While research is much bigger, then appear in that journal. The journal may be more conservative because, you know, the rigor for them is probably so critical that it's difficult to do something unconventional. So, for example, the article I mentioned before by Ronald Coase is one of my favorite articles. Was published on a journal that is not a top journal in economics. It's called Economica, but it won the Nobel Prize. So probably sometime you can also find the germ. And also articles are highly cited in low-quality journal, while there are top articles in top journals that basically receive very few citations. Or maybe you remember another colleague that is American. Ronald was British. Edward Freeman. He became famous with a book written in 1984. And today he's a guru in stakeholder management. So probably there are more ways, and we need to start thinking outside the box if we want to be more unconventional, and eventually we can be even much more productive and impactful than people that stay only in the narrow box.
Thank you. Big conversation, a conversation close to all of us, but a conversation that for today at least, or up here today at least, must end. I'd like to invite everybody to thank our wonderful panelists.